Welcome to the live stream of Regenerative Consciousness Rising podcast, part of the IRN. Uh, and today we have a very special discussion for you on creating a culture of empathy and appreciation, some subject very close to my heart, and I'm really happy to welcome our guest, Suzanne Jones. But before we begin and introducing Suzanne and the subject, let's just, as we like to do at everything we do at the IRN, we like to do a little grounding and connecting to get ourselves present and really arrive. So just invite anyone listening to just take a moment and just connect to their breath, your breath, and feel the weight of your body. Just feeling the breath in your belly. Just getting really present to what you're feeling right now. Setting aside whatever you may have been doing before you arrived here. Just taking this time as some time for you uh, to just stop and be with us. Be together, be connected. We really welcome you and welcome your beautiful present self to this virtual space. I'm Jewel Bistrova, and as I mentioned, this is the Regenerative Consciousness Rising podcast. This is our new podcast for 2022, and today's topic is creating a culture of empathy and appreciation, what that means. What does that really mean? We're going to discuss that today with my beautiful colleague and guest, Suzanne Jones. Suzanne joined the IRN last fall when she offered a session on empathy or empathic listening and at our Regenerative Community Summit. And she's been a teacher of nonviolent communication for over 20 years and has led and taught nonviolent communication and empathic listening in many capacities. And now she's offering that for and with us at the IRN, including our community of practice tomorrow. If you're listening to this on Sunday, it's on Monday the 21st. We have a monthly connection cafe, and that's a community practice where we get to be with each other and practice empathic listening with each other. And it's just really, really very nourishing time. So invite all of you to join us. And I'll be putting that link in the chat later if you'd like to sign up. But now I'd like to just turn it over to Suzanne. And I know I've given a little bit of your background, but I'm really looking forward to hearing more about you, Suzanne, and tell us more about your background and what you've been doing and how you got into it and where you're at now. So the floor is yours. And you got to unmute.
Yep. Oh, I was waiting for you to do it. Yeah, so I grew up in a very critical background and a very authoritarian background. And so I experienced a lot of trauma just from never being heard, like they actually used to say, children should be seen and not heard. And but I was a very thoughtful and outgoing personality, and this was really hard on me. And so when I became an adult, I experienced a lot of stress, like a constant, push pull. Should I talk? Shouldn't I talk? What's my place here? And it was very confusing and stressful. So I ended up falling into a Gestalt therapy group where the Gestalt is all about getting in touch with your feelings, like making a safe place where you can learn to identify your feelings. And I realized I only had two, happy and depressed. And because I'd never really been allowed to express them. So I was very much involved with that off and on for quite a while. And then when I was in my late 30s, I went to a workshop, a week-long workshop on a completely different topic, but a lot of the people there had been studying nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication, and they were telling me about it. And I was saying, oh yeah, that sounds really interesting, but I'm kind of doing something else, and I didn't, I didn't pick up on it until about 3 years later when I was trying to do a project, and I decided I needed to learn more about communication because people were coming together for my project, but I noticed that they didn't know how to communicate with one another. And so that was in 1994. And that's when I started my education about this way of being able to talk to one another in a way that other people could actually hear you. And to be able to talk back and forth and share our ideas back and forth with one another. But most importantly, to really listen to one another. And this is something that we all need the most and get the least, because especially in Western cultures, we're not very well trained to listen. And so I was fascinated, and so I've been involved ever since teaching. I work with individuals, organizations, businesses, um, summits. I usually try to be at a summit where I know that this kind of thing would be interesting to people. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years.
Fantastic. Yeah. You really, uh, what you just said really, I really resonate with about how we aren't taught how to listen in this culture. And and also just like being in the activist world, I've also noticed how that carries over in a lot of the organizational stuff that I've been part of, and just seeing how like there's this sense of urgency. We've got to save the world, and so that just carries over in the way we talk with each other, where we just kind of like rush to get to the agenda, rush to get to whatever the project is, and we forget to just be with each other and just listen to each other. And of course then conflict happens because people misunderstand each other because they don't take the time to really listen to each other, and so on and so forth. And so I know I personally got really interested in this work. Diana Kublios, who's also in part of the IRN, she's also teaches NVC, um, and she's been sharing a lot about the culture of appreciation, and I've been learning from her. But I've really got interested in it because I've watched uh, so much of what happens when we don't listen to each other, and how that just really creates a lot of unnecessary problems if we just slow down a little bit and stop and take a moment to really like be present with each other. We could avoid so much conflict.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the irony of it all. We do need to save the world, but the best way to do it is to listen to one another. And not only are we not trained to do it, but because of our lack of training, it's hard for us to do. And I also blame it on the Enlightenment, although the Enlightenment brought a lot of really beautiful, beautiful things, but it also, you know, prioritized intellect and reasoning. And we get this idea that we need to make judgments and we need to make them quickly. That is a sign of intelligence, that we can make judgments and we can help people with their problems. And but the East Indian philosopher J. Krishnamurti told us actually the highest sign of intelligence is to be able to observe without judging. It's just almost exactly the opposite of what the way we've been operating, for at least the last 400 or 500 years. So it's not only that we're not trained, we're in a system that is not encouraging it. We're in a very hierarchical system that isn't really about listening to everybody and putting everybody's needs on the table.
Yeah, yeah, and I also, like you mentioned, you grew up in a very critical family. I also was raised with a lot of criticism, not much positive encouragement, but more like, everything I'm doing wrong. And so and that also seems pretty prevalent in our culture. And how the compounding issue of both not listening, but also being very quick to go to what's wrong and to criticize. Um, I mean, we could just say that that is the root of a lot of the problems in our society, right?
Yes, absolutely.
But it's like the criticism, eh, as I've looked at it deeper, like I have a strong science background and family, and so criticism is seen as like trying to be helpful, like that we're trying to, like science, you want to be critically thinking and you want to see what the problems are because that's part of the methodology. It doesn't carry very well into social and familial structures, which is what happened with my family and I think, in general. But there's an impulse there that is good, like we need to, we want to solve a problem. Um, but finding a way to do that in our culture, in our social structures, and the way we are with each other and working together, that's really interesting to me. How do we bring, and that brings in this idea of appreciation, which is, I guess you could say, is the opposite of criticism. But how do we bring in authentic appreciation? We're still trying to solve problems. We're still trying to get to uh, some means of as the means of some end. Um, we don't want to be like Pollyanna spiritual bypass type, which is, by the way, one of the things that I've heard a lot of criticism of MVC because I think it's used that way. It's used to spiritually bypass sometimes, when people don't. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But anyway, how do we give it and receive appreciation in a way that is authentic and um, and gives feedback also where it's important? I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's all about where you are, where the person who comes and connects with NVC is in their own path. And Marshall Rosenberg didn't initially talk about it as a spiritual path, but he did eventually go ahead and start talking about it that way. And I have to say, I give it credit for a great deal of my personal spiritual growth, because what it did teach me to do was be totally honest and authentic with myself and with everyone else. And so, but when you're just starting, you don't really understand it that well. You have to practice it for a while. You have to experience it with other people and go through it. And so it is very common for people to make lots of mistakes and say, well, I feel that you, which is not a feeling at all, and it comes from compassion. We really have such a desire to contribute to one another's well-being, which is another thing that Marshall Rosenberg said. And so it's just that we don't know how, like you were saying, to do it in a way that really always lifts people up. And we do this funny little thing where when people give us advice, unsolicited advice, or tell us make a criticism, or maybe put down our opinion about something, we pretend that that's okay, that we feel okay about that. And we rarely do, because our most precious need is autonomy and to be recognized for what's going on in us. So how we can do this better is right in the first part of NVC. The very first step of the 4 guidelines is we don't judge, we don't evaluate, we don't analyze, we don't try to fix somebody. And the first question that people always ask me when I say that is, well, aren't there times when you have to judge? Don't we have to make judgments in order to get through life? And there's an important distinction. We do have to judge whether our soup is too hot to eat, yes. But what we don't need to do is make moral judgments. This is bad, this is good, you're right, you're wrong. That was inappropriate, that was appropriate. And we don't realize, because of our training, that we don't need any of that in order to communicate with other people. And in fact, it usually gets in the way of our being able to connect with other people. So that's the very first lesson, which is the very hard lesson in my practice groups that I will facilitate. We have to learn this over and over and over again, because the first thing that happens when we start to speak back to another person is we want to make a judgment, or we want to make them feel better. We want to reassure them. We evaluate them. We use terms like enough. That's not enough. That is enough. That's to this or to that. And every one of those judgments, evaluations, and opinions and criticisms and labels, it gets between the 2 people actually connecting with one another.
Yeah. So how do we actually connect?
Yeah.
What are some ways that we can bring that in, and even if we don't know, the ins and outs of these methods?
Yeah. So it sounds so simplistic, maybe even trite, but we listen. Carl Rogers was the man who brought empathy into the psychological world in the 1950s. He was known for promoting the humanistic psychology idea, which was very different from before that, where the psychologists were the experts and they told you what was wrong with you and they told you how to fix it. And then Carl Rogers came in and he just empathized with people. He just supported them while they told him what was really going on with them. And I've listened to tapes of him, on YouTube. There's a lot of really good tapes. And there really doesn't come a point where he says, okay, fine, I've heard you. Let me tell you how to fix this. Because he believed that we have this organismic tendency, he called it, to get better and be more connected. And if we're just supported for that, rather than told what to do, criticized, et cetera, that it will come naturally, that we'll figure it out. And I have found that to be true in the years that I've been doing this. I have found that to be true pretty much all of the time.
Yeah. And the way you introduce that into conversations, I know one thing that you've said to me and that has really stuck is uh, we just slow down. And I love that. I love that. That we're often as we mentioned a little while ago, just how we're often rushed in our conversations, and we're trying to get to the point, and we want to make our point, and we're thinking about what our point is while the other person's talking, and and we're just getting to some goal for the conversation, as opposed to just being with uh, the other. Um, and to be with the other requires, well, when you said slow down, like, it's like, yes, of course, that makes sense. Just slow down. I don't have to do anything extra to to I just need to slow I just need to just kind of, you know, put on the brakes a little bit, and then I'll start feeling, and what's needed will emerge, and I'll be able to connect with this other person or these people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and whenever I get in a situation, it's usually a group situation where I find myself wanting really badly to speak, but maybe I can't because everybody else is speaking, telling their opinion. I'll check in with myself and say, why? Why do I want to speak? What need am I trying to meet that makes me want to speak? And sometimes I really do have something I feel would be valuable to share. And other times it's just my ego saying, I just want everybody to know how smart I am about this topic, And by checking in with myself, listening to myself, I'll make different decisions. Like I may decide, well, I don't need to speak. Actually, that's just my ego. Or if I really think it's valuable, I will go ahead and, try to get my turn to speak. But we need to listen to ourselves as much as we need to listen to one another.
Yeah, and when you say that, it it makes me realize that dialogue and conversation done mindfully this way is really a spiritual practice, because we're also looking at ourselves and what our motivations are for speaking, and what we really want to be saying, and that's a deeper inquiry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what is really mattering to us in that moment. And always to be in the moment, because that's never spiritual practice, because things change moment to moment. So to be able to listen to ourselves in that moment really puts us, in touch with ourselves, and it just shifts what we say and when we say it, because now we do have that information about what really is going on inside of us.
And I would imagine that when we do talk, it's going to have more presence and potency behind it. Um, you're reminding me, I haven't done this for years, but I used to have a practice where one day a week I had a day of silence. And I wouldn't sequester myself away from people. I would still be in silent, but it would be around other people. And it was truly a challenge, because they would be talking and I would be silent, and there would be things that I'd really want to say, and things that they'd said that I really have to respond to, like, oh, I got to correct them, because they said something wrong or whatever, and I got to. I got to let them know, but I couldn't because I was committed to this silence. And I realized through the practice of doing this how much, like what you're saying, it's just like how much what was really motivating me and how much I really didn't need to say. It was like 90% of what I would have said, I realized in the long run, I really didn't need to say any of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and that just helps us listen to the other person because we don't have as much that we think we have to say.
Yeah. And the practice of empathy that I know you've been holding a wonderful space for us around empathic listening. Maybe you could say a little bit about um, what that's about.
Yeah, I would like to. First, I'd like to answer the other question that you asked me a while back about appreciation.
Oh, yes, yes.
And so there's this notion of praise versus gratitude. And Marshall Rosenberg said praise is actually a hierarchical way of communicating, because in that moment we're kind of making ourselves the expert of the person who knows and wants to tell the other person that they did a good job, And sure, it's nice to hear that you did a good job, for sure, definitely, instead of that you did a bad job. But you can go so much deeper by telling the other person what they did or what they said and what that brought alive in you. So instead of saying, yeah, thanks, that was a good job, say a boss to an employee, say, what if the boss said, I felt so grateful when you got this report to me as quickly as you did, because it really helped me meet my need to get this project on time. Thank you. And now the other person knows what they did and what they said and what was appreciated in them, instead of just being told, well, you did a good job. And that's how it feels oftentimes, oh, you did a good job. Instead, it's like, thank you for what you gave me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it does, and it reinforces hierarchy when the praise. I hadn't thought of that in that way before, and how sharing what came alive in me when you did something that I want to appreciate you for, how that equalizes us, like because I'm respecting you as a person by sharing what kind of impact you specifically made on me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that same way of communicating is part of the NBC. If it's the opposite, if somebody does something that upsets you, it's not usually them. Really, people don't make us feel anything. They might stimulate something already in us. But if we say, oh, you made me mad, then it's just think of all of the questions that might come up in a person's mind about how, what did I do? I didn't mean to. Whereas if a person said, when you yelled at me just now, or actually yell is an evaluation because some people talk louder than others, but I often feed people's words back to them. When you said blah, 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 I felt scared. I know that I have a need to be heard, and I'm not sure I was heard. And would you be willing to tell me what I did or said exactly, specifically, that brought that up in you? In other words, again, it's just slowing down, staying away from the labels and the judgments and the evaluations, and sharing what is really going on with you and hearing what is really going on with the other person. And by the way, I just did the 4 steps of made an observation by sharing their words back to them, told them what my feelings were, what rose up, what my underlying need was, because feelings are connected to needs, usually come out of our needs, met or unmet needs, and then made a request, made a specific request.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, um, 'cause those have both. I know you were responding to my bringing up the question around appreciation, but it also weaves into an empathy, um, because so ultimately these steps are are both appreciation and empathy, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And authenticity. So we really do say what's going on with us. But by saying, I feel scared because I was needing this, and would you be willing, is so different and so connecting than, well, that wasn't very nice of you. Why did you act that way? You know? I mean, you just feel the difference in the energy.
but what do you do when you're triggered?
Yes, very important question. You So self-empathy is as important as empathy, and some people even say self-empathy comes first, especially if you know you're going into a situation that could be conflictual. You do the same thing with yourself. When I think about going into this meeting, I feel worried, excited, but nervous. I have a need to be heard about what matters to me. And so in that case, I might make the request of myself. So I'm just going to request of myself that I go in without an agenda, that I drop my agenda if I notice it, in other words, and I just listen and slow down. Yeah. So that's self-empathy, which is the same 4 steps: observation, feeling, needs, and request. And now I am centered because I know what's going on with me.
Do you recommend that, like, if you're really triggered, that you just take some time away from the trigger for a while, or
Yeah.
what if you can't? What if you're engaged in a conversation and you need to attend to that in the moment?
Yeah. I really like the questions you're answering. I call that advanced NBC because whenever you're triggered, it makes it all harder. But the beauty of this is it's what it's a word I'm looking for. It's leading us to be very authentic. And so we can be very authentic. And I have found this shifts a lot of things. Like if I say, okay, wait a minute, I notice I am getting revved up here, and I would like to maybe calm down a little bit. I'm just gonna, because could I have a minute to take a couple of breaths? I mean, we can talk with one another that way, and it just connects us even further. Every time we admit what's really going on with us, it makes it more likely that they will say what's really going on with them. And now we're in this, I just feel it in my solar plexus, we're in this just really connected place instead of this place up here that we argue from. Marshall Rosenberg said that he said, I can solve any problem, I don't care how long it's been going on, within 20 minutes of the moment when the two people hear one another's needs.
Oh, wow, that's beautiful. Yeah, you remind me. I have a friend that has expressed uh, some challenges with NVC because she feels like, well, I mean, as I mentioned already, there's like it does get used in a kind of a bypassing way sometimes. Like you mentioned already, as if somebody hasn't really studied it and understands how to really use it, it can be used that way. Um, but her, when I was in a conversation with her and I was like trying to understand, I realized that she had a need to just be able to vent,
Mhm.
and be heard without censoring herself, and like it felt too constraining to be having to think about, oh, this is my feeling and this is my need, and when she just wanted to just be able to like just like this. And I can relate to that. I mean, there's times when it's like it feels really good to, something you've been sitting on and thinking about somebody or something, that it's like this release when you just get to say it, like even though it doesn't come out in the best way. Um, so I can understand that, it's like just this feeling of just release and just being able to be okay with saying whatever.
Mhm.
Um, so I guess I'm wondering if there's situations, I guess if you have an agreement with somebody, like, can I just let it out, and can we have an agreement? Or are there situations where that's okay, or do you feel like that's not,
Yeah.
I don't know what.
No, that's a great question because NBC is about making a connection. It's it's not about making peace, although peace often happens. It's not about fixing one another, helping one another. It's about making a connection. And however we make that connection is very, very valuable. But I always say you can do and say, the guidelines are guidelines. They're not rules. They're Marshall Rosenberg wrote those guidelines to keep himself in the place he wanted to be with other people. So there really are guidelines. And so I like to say you can do and say anything you want as long as you're willing to pick up the pieces. Because the reality is we all need to vent, but venting, and like, let's say we're feeling, I am so angry, I am so frustrated, I just want to bang on the couch, which I do occasionally, and is totally different than I hate you. You are causing all my problems. So we do have to make these are the kind of judgments like, is my soup too hot to eat? Uh, I know that if I start blaming somebody else, that is not going to go well, probably. I have a lot better shot of making that connection if I can share my feelings. I'm scared, I'm sad, I'm frustrated, I'm worried, I'm confused. I don't know what to do right now, you know. But you can, I mean, I had a friend for a while, but he just wouldn't connect with the whole idea of NBC. And I literally would have to say something that I knew was going to make him mad to connect. He was raised with older brothers, and there was a lot of bullying in the family. And if I'd say, what are you feeling? He'd say, no, I'm not going there. And so I would literally have to just say, well, that was just a weird thing to say on your part. And then of course he'd trigger, but I knew how to empathize. So as soon as he'd trigger, then I'd start empathizing, and then he would be fine, and then we could talk in an egalitarian fashion. So it's intuitional as well. And you really do have to pay attention to what that other person is needing, even if they can't tell you all the time, because we're not good at knowing what our needs are. So it does take some time to study. And one other thing I want to add to that is I studied NBC for 8 years before I ever taught it. And then I only taught it because I got in a situation um, where I had an opportunity to teach it. And I told myself, well, I don't do it well all the time either, but that's no reason for me not to pass this information along. Maybe they'll do it better. And then I gave myself permission to teach it. It's a process. It's a paradigm shift. So yeah, it takes a while to learn all the really great aspects of it.
Do you know if there's other tools besides MVC that also support this idea of creating a culture of empathy and appreciation, or is MVC kind of more of it like it's so expansive and generic, it sort of embraces all of it?
Yeah, it is. It's really expansive, and that's part of why I've stuck with it. Although, yes, there are other tools out there. There's like, I think they call it compassionate communication. That's another one. Active listening is another one. Interestingly, though, Thomas Gordon, who introduced active listening, also studied under Carl Rogers at the same time Marshall Rosenberg did. And they just kind of took a different, path with it. So yes, there are other things out there. And I believe that, anything we can learn about it is going to make a difference in our life in a positive way. But with the MVC, he took it a little further. He really took it into our feelings and into our needs. It's one thing to feed back to somebody what you've heard them say, but then it's another step to share what came up in you and what needs you discover were underneath that. So that's why I like NVC so much, because of that extra.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you're also making me think of there's so many dialogue processes out there too, that are really powerful. I love dialogue and conversational processes as a spiritual path, and as we mentioned, it's a way of inquiring deeper into ourselves. But MVC is brings in that whole human person, that whole human element of our feelings. So it's not just a dialogue of like, artful conversation.
Right. Yeah, it really brings in what's alive in us. And so you're asking, like, how do I go about facilitating empathy, I guess would be the way to say it, the technical term, is that I just keep people in touch with themselves. So what are you feeling right now? When she said that, what came up for you? And does anybody want to feedback what they heard that person say without adding any judgments or opinions? Maybe the opportunity for people to practice it, because it really does take practice.
And what about the people that don't want to, that you're engaged in conversation, and they just want to be right, and they want to make their point, and they don't have the patience to feel into what their feelings are in those situations?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I'll tell 2 quick stories. I worked with the Occupy movement people for quite a while, and this one woman was a venter. She just wanted to vent and to take over the conversation and vent. And I kept asking her to please, tell us what she was feeling. And so she hung up and left the call. And then the next time I did a call, facilitated call, she showed up again. And when she realized I was the one in charge, she hung up and left the call because she really didn't want what I was offering. But in the same situation, there was a gentleman who had been a Vietnam War veteran, and he was now at the Occupy movement and standing up for what that was about, compassionate government and everything. So he came on the call, not sure why, but he did. And I gave the little explanation up front that I always gave about what it was about. And he said, well, in all respect, that's not going to work. So I said, okay. And here's the empathy part. I didn't start defending it. I said, okay, I hear you. You do not believe this is going to work. And he said, no, I do not. I said, okay. And so I said, I have a request. Would you be willing to just hang out with us for a while? And you can leave anytime you want, but just hang out and see where it goes. And so he agreed to do that. So long story short, by the end of the call, he had received tons of empathy. He was telling everybody how grateful he was for the compassion that he had been given. So you just have to stay connected with them as much as possible. One more short story. I had a woman, we were in a group, and she got angry, and she got up and she was leaving. And as she's walking out the door, I just kept repeating back to her what I heard her say. You're mad. I hear you. You're mad. And yes, you're not getting what you want here. And you're mad at her. I hear that. And so it's like she stopped walking toward the door. And then eventually she turned around and sat down and stayed for the whole rest of the meeting and came back several times. just because I heard her, instead of saying, oh, now come on, don't get upset, sit down, which would have been hierarchical, judgmental, opinionated, I just heard her, and she turned around and sat down. So it really does work in some pretty lively situations.
That's beautiful. Those are great stories. I, it's making me think of, times when I've been in conversations with people where somebody reacted to something I said, and there was no space or wherewithal for me to really be able to explain, like whatever it is they thought I said and that they're getting triggered by is not really what I meant and not really what was going on. And so there was this disconnect that would happen. And I mean, I'm sure that's pretty common, that kind of disconnect.
Yeah.
And I'm just been reflecting on that, like how sad I feel, and that need to be seen, to be understood, is um, is so missing, in so many conversations, and I've certainly experienced that myself quite a bit, and that longing to want to, well, first the longing shows up as a desire to explain myself, like, but I didn't mean that. This is what I meant. This is where I was really coming from. I was trying to blah, blah, blah. So there's that urge, to want to explain myself. But even deeper underneath that need for that desire is a deeper desire to um, just to be seen, just to take a moment and just see me, just feel me. I'm another human being in conversation with you, and I want to show you, my vulnerable self, I want to show you my heart, and and I'm scared, because sometimes when I do that it gets stomped on and I feel stomped on, but that longing doesn't go away. I want to be seen. It's like that's just such a deep longing, and um and I notice I keep coming back to conversations, and that's part of that longing is what drives it, as well as my longing to see other people too, not just to be seen, but to see you. Who are you?
Mm-hmm.
What's motivating your being to show up here in this conversation?
Mm-hmm. To have that connection. Marshall Rosenberg called it a certain quality of connection, which is a very deep and vulnerable connection. And it's gotten me through some amazing situations that seemed hopeless at the outset. And although he did start out as a conflict resolution person, he ended up working in that way in countries all around the world. When decolonization started, there was so much anger and the tribes with one another, and so he did a lot of work with that. And there's some very powerful stories there too.
Yeah, and we don't have to. The beauty is that we don't have to agree with each other. With it seems at first like we're in conflict because we are in disagreement, but it looking at it deeper, for me, I feel like we're not in conflict because of disagreement. We're in conflict because we're really not touching into that deeper longing to be
Mhm.
seen and to see each other, because I can see you can show up for a completely different reason than me, and we may never understand or agree. But if I hear you and really see you for what how you're showing up, whether I agree with it or not, that connects us.
Yes, we see our common humanity. Yeah. So if we can really hear one another's needs, again, Marshall Rosenberg, I brought him up several times, but he did develop this. Um, he said that we're seldom in disagreement at our needs level, because most of our needs are pretty universal: safety, connection, to be seen, to be heard, a roof over our head, clean water. It's at the strategy level that we tend to argue. This is how we're going to get that need met. And then we have two different strategies. And then when we finally, if we can, drop down to hearing one another's needs, things shift. I've seen it many, many times. It's quite overwhelmingly amazing at times.
I wonder, are these tools being used in conversations between very polarized views? I mean, I know that um, there's some great work being done to bring together, say, Republicans and Democrats, in Braver Angels and some other
Mhm.
places. Although they're not using this technique, they're using more of a structured debate platform. But it's really all about listening to each other. It's all about just listening and giving each other space to do that. But do you know of other places where people from very like contentious views are coming together and getting to that deeper place?
Yeah, as far as NBC is concerned, a lot of people do work individually with groups or within different areas. There's a man who's been involved with NBC for many years, Dominic Barter, who has worked in the favelas in Buenos Aires for many, many years, and has just had, really great results there. And I had a long list of all the new Congress people that a couple of years ago that I was going to send them all my book about expressing feelings and needs in the workplace. And then everything got so crazy with COVID and everything. I thought, well, nobody's going to read it. Probably. Maybe I should have sent it actually, but I still have it. I still can do that. So, but a lot of people do tend to be working individually. And for many of them, it is volunteer work. And most people have to have other jobs. Some people can make enough money at it, giving various workshops and everything.
Yeah, like us.
Yeah.
But it's like I really feel like the front line of activism of like those that are um, doing kind of the transition type work where trying to get off the fossil fuel economy and adapt to uh, a much lower energy cost way of living and being together and resourcing more communally and locally is, uh, you know, really clearly a good way to go for a lot of us who see that. But these social skills of how to be together, like the culture of empathy and appreciation, which is what we're talking about, as not just a nice idea that makes us feel good, but it's like literally what I see we need to be doing in order to even make it as a species, because we're so embroiled in traumatizing and traumatic ways of communicating with each other that it's literally been killing us. So we shifting to this culture is a very, very deeply healing and challenging um, culture change work. But I really see it. That's why I've been focusing on being in the activist world with it, because like that's the front lines of like how do we bring that change into the world. um, and not only does it help us survive it, we're much happier, right? I mean, our needs are getting met.
Yes.
We're
Yes.
seeing each other. I mean, I don't know anybody that doesn't like being appreciated.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. I consider the fact that we have not been taught very well how to listen, the crux of most of the world's problems at the very base. I don't mean to be simplistic, but it's not that simplistic, because it really is the problem that we have. I have one last story to share. My partner is a Republican, and I am a liberal, a progressive liberal, in fact. And when we first met, he's a very kind man and very thoughtful. And it didn't even occur to me to ask him what his political leanings were, And then one day I did, or he said something, and I said, did you by any chance vote for Trump? And he said, yes, I did. And I didn't know what to do with that, because being a progressive liberal, I'm not really going to vote for Trump. So we did end up having some pretty big conversations around our differences of opinion. And this was fairly early on in our relationship. And I questioned, are we going to make it? Because we seem to have completely different strategies about how to solve the world's problems. And so finally, I remembered to ask him what the needs were, what needs were getting met in the decisions that he made about who he voted for. And I heard all the same needs I had, just two very different strategies. And so we have made an agreement not to talk about it a lot, because our strategies are so different that it's just hard to hear one another, because we're both so in our hearts wanting, the same thing, just from a different way, compassionate, just economy, a compassionate government, everybody's needs being met, all the children being fed, and it just changed everything when we were able to hear that from one another. And we've now been together for 2.5 years, and and occasionally we talk about it, but we do it always in that way of, we know now who that other person is. We're not judging them because of their choice of strategies. So I consider that a success story.
Oh, that's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. I didn't know that. And yeah, um, it's a good reminder, to people that trigger me, that because I think that how could they possibly want, or think that way, just to take that time to explore the deeper needs.
Yeah. So even though I probably haven't, except for maybe listing the 4 steps, I haven't really said exactly, how it works. I think I've given a lot of examples that in an overall way show that, yeah, there are all these places that it really makes a difference in being able to hear one another, and in the relationship, and when whether you can move forward together and things like that, in collaboration with a group, an organization. In fact, one of the things I do is, whenever I'm in a business meeting, first thing I do is I ask everybody at the table, what need are you trying to meet by being here today? And it just gets a whole new start to things.
That's great. Well, maybe as we wrap up here, maybe you can give us some tips and tools for, like, just right out the door here, like my next conversation, whoever's listening, their next conversation with somebody, what can they practice? What can they do to bring in a little more appreciation and empathy, both ways?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So what you were talking about earlier, having one day of silence a week, something like that. Just next time you get in a conversation with somebody, just listen. Don't say anything for a while. Probably they won't care that you're not speaking. They'll just tell you what's going on with them. But make that your effort. I'm just going to listen, and just do that for many times, over the next week, and see what realizations come up for you, or what questions come up for you. So that's one of the very first exercises I give people in a group, is to talk to one person, tell a story, and the other person not listen. I mean, not, sorry, just listen. And then the second step is, okay, so tell the story, and now the second person just feedback what you're hearing them say without adding any opinions. Don't try to make them feel better, no evaluations, no judgments. And I think that just those two things alone can make a big difference in seeing how practical it could be, how useful it can be to just do those two things.
And what about appreciation? How can we bring more of that in?
Yeah. So the next time somebody says to you that they appreciate you, step one is thank you. Because we all have a tendency to say, oh, it was nothing. De nada, just dismiss it. Just take it in and say thank you. And then you can even ask the other person, what was it I did that encouraged you to share your appreciation with me? And then they'll probably tell you. And if you want to appreciate somebody else, the opposite, tell them, what they said, what they did, what feelings did that bring up in you, or what needs did that meet for you? So these are exercises. I call them exercises because they do help us exercise these ideas. And this is a very hands-on thing that we learn it by doing it.
Yeah, and expressing appreciation. I mean, listening they're both super important. But I've noticed that ex, expressing more appreciation where it's not expected, like it's just surprise to that person, like finding something I authentically connect with somebody and letting them know. And I don't need to do that. I don't, there's no expectation for me to do that, but in doing that, um, there's a sweetness and a connection that happens, and they get fed in some way, and I get fed by doing it. And it's something I'm really trying to develop more of a habit around doing that, like to create this culture of appreciation, because there's so little of it out there, and I've noticed, how little of it sometimes I feel in my life, and so just finding all those little and big ways that I can appreciate somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you tell me that, what I feel is excited to know that you're doing that, because I do. I think it's also very important as well, and it just brings up this excitement inside me. Like, oh gosh, that's so beautiful. I'm glad to hear that you're doing it.
Yeah, and I want to shine that appreciation light on you
Yeah.
right now. Just what a beautiful soul you are, and how you show up. You're there's a I get a feeling of just it's just such a nice, a calm, grounded feeling when I'm around you, and I feel like I have permission, to just speak what I want to say. I don't feel like you're trying to get me to go by the rules, of anything. You just hold that space,
Mm.
and it gives a lot of permission. And so I just really want to express that very specific appreciation for you.
Yes, yes, thank you. I really love hearing that you experience me that way. That meets my need for knowing that I may actually be doing the things that I hold so valuable. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that appreciation very much. I was getting a little bit of tingling going on
Right on. I
there.
like tingling is good. Feeling gratitude and feeling gratitude for all those that are listening now or later. Thank you for listening. Appreciating you. And we'll see you at the next podcast. Please subscribe and like the channel if you haven't already. Join us. And tomorrow is Suzanne's community practice on empathic listening, and it's just a wonderful space to just drop in and just practice with each other, feeding back, listening to each other, and usually there's some topic that we'll, ask questions or share around. And do you know what the topic is going to be tomorrow? No? Okay, we'll come up with
I
it
think we
tomorrow.
decided.
Anyway, it's a wonderful community of people, and you are invited. And yeah, sign up for the IRN newsletter. If you go to innerresilience.net, you'll see a place to sign up if you aren't already on it. And we'll see you next time. And I'm just so grateful to you, Suzanne. Thank you for showing up and being part of the change that we need in the world.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
All right. And with that, I'll say goodbye. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.